Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to another tier list here on Star Wars Lads. We are going to be doing the High Republic for our tier list for June. This is our updated tier list, so we will be including everything from Phase 1, which we've already ranked before in tier list format, but we will also be updating it with everything from Phase 2. So we're going to dive into this. Make sure you're hitting that like button down below and you're subscribed to the channel for more Star Wars content. We do a tier list every single month, so if you're interested in tier lists, make sure you're subscribed. Also, comment below. Let us know what you thought of our rankings. Give us your rankings down below. We'd like to interact with you guys in the comments, and we will respond to everything you have to say. So let's get into the tier list here. I'm going to bring in the tiers, and we've got S through F as usual, and we're going to start with Light of the Jedi. Light of the Jedi, to me, is still my favorite book in the High Republic. I love this novel. It's written by Charles Soule. What a wonderful book. Introduces the entire era of the High Republic so well, as well as some great characters like Belzettifar, Avar Kriss, Elzar Mann, Bur Yaga, Loden Greatstorm. On top of all that, it introduces one of the best villains we've gotten in Star Wars canon, Marchion Ro. As we continue to get the Evereni, Marchion Ro, the Nile, the Path of the Open Hand, all that stuff developed. It makes me love this book and the way to set up everything that much more. This is definitely an S tier.
I can't say any more than that. That's easy S tier. Avar Chris's Battle Meditation, Elzar Mann, just seeing the big three together. Next is A Test of Courage by Justina Ireland. Honestly, this might still be the best junior novel that we've ever had in Star Wars history. Vernestra Rowe, seriously, a very cool character. Seeing some of the more darker elements of the story was pretty surprising the first time I read it, and I think it still holds up really well. So I think I'll put it in A tier.
Yeah, A Test of Courage, I think, is still easily the best junior novel in canon. I'm torn between A and B because I think this is a B level story, but for its medium, I think I would give it an A as well. So next we move on to the Marvel High Republic Phase 1 series. This was about Avar Kriss and Keeve Trennis. This is a series that at times feels a bit disjointed. I really like the beginning of the series. I think the first 6 issues or so, 6 to 8 issues, are really solid. Kevin Scott's a good comic book writer. I'm torn between A and B here. I think this is a really solid series. I don't think it's an elite comic book series, but it is one of the better ones in the High Republic, in my opinion. I'd probably put it in B, though. I would say top of B would be where I would slot the High Republic Phase 1.
Yeah, I think I'm in agreement as well. It really is the fact that Avar being the first major Jedi that we're introduced to in this era, and her having her story kind of put to the back burner. But at the same time, I think the selling point for me was always Keeve Trennis. I mean, if for the mainline series, it had some much more mature themes than I expected. Our next one is the High Republic Adventures from IDW. I like the original art style. I think the one that they bring in the middle before reverting back to the original is okay. I think it fits a little bit better and a later comic series. I really liked the character Zine having that perspective of being someone who doesn't realize she has the Force, kind of unlocks it once a disaster is happening. Yeah, I mean honestly, I almost want to put it in A just because how impressed I was. I do think some of the storytelling is a little simplified at the end of the day, but it's a strong B. I almost want to put it ahead of the Marvel High Republic because just of how much I enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's a tough decision. I do think it's a B comic book. Its characters overall, I think all of it's really strong. The writing here is good. A nice progression for its characters throughout the entire series. Something that when you start with issue 1 and you read all the way to issue 13, these characters are completely different and they've grown so much. I do find the first 5 issues to be really mediocre. I think it's more of a surprise than the Marvel series. The Marvel series might have been a little better overall. I think I might put the Marvel series right ahead of it. Well, next we head Into the Dark, which was the first young adult novel in Phase 1. This was written by Claudia Gray. So this stars Reith Silas as well as a bunch of other characters in a really good ensemble. Claudia Gray is really good at writing young adult novels. It was her entry point into the Star Wars universe with Lost Stars, and she continues it here. I think this is one of the better young adult novels we've gotten. I used to say it's the best until we got Phase 2, but this is easily the best in Phase 1. The mystery of the Drangir slowly unfolding. Really, really good stuff. I think the third act starts to wobble a little bit. It gets a little diluted with how much story there is here. but ultimately a really strong book, and I think an A tier amongst High Republic books.
You know, having Claudia Gray's name on it, you're like, oh, she's done some great stuff already, but is she going to be able to put her stamp on the High Republic Phase 1? And she certainly did. It's a very good mystery book. I also like the flashbacks with Orla Jareni and with Comac when they were Padawans with their masks. I think the Drengir here have never been better. I think this is the best way to really experience the Drengir for the first time. I would say A tier. Our next book is the next adult novel, and this is the headliner for Wave 2 of Phase 1, and that was The Rising Storm by Cavan Scott. Now, personally, this is my favorite, so if I could even put it as an S plus tier, I would. Battle of Valo is incredible to read. The visuals behind it and the covers that you can get on some of the special market edition ones makes it so incredible. Seeing Elzar Mann's story with kind of his like romance and then kind of dealing with all his emotions, that's having a strong emotional connection with Ty York as they're like following the beast around. That was like the highlight of the book for me. It's incredible to me. I thought Light of the Jedi was great, and the Nile structure and development there is essential and needed. But I think Markian Ro reaches another level in this book for me, and seeing what the Nile are doing here was really great. Easily S.
That's fair. This is still my second favorite book in the High Republic. A great novel, one that is much more action packed than Light of the Jedi, where Light of the Jedi succeeds in world building and really diving into this universe, what it's like at the time. The Rising Storm is able to build off of that with darker villain moments for Markion Rowe, more violent action, more in-depth looks at certain characters from Light of the Jedi like Elzar Mann. Definitely an S-tier book, and one of the best, with Light of the Jedi, one of the best books we've gotten in Star Wars canon. Race to Crashpoint Tower is next, our next junior novel to talk about. This book disappointed me, for sure. I think I would put this in the D tier, especially now having read so many junior novels in the High Republic. This is the weakest one. I think it's too simple. It doesn't really follow a character arc that branches over the course of a lot of time or sees our characters put through many tests. It's very Daniel Jose Older, so it's a lot of sophomoric jokes, very young characters who are making a lot of quips, a lot of like goofy things happen.
Yeah, I can see it be a bit of a whiplash, especially of how great A Test of Courage is for introducing young readers and to get them very quickly invested with great characters there. I think for me, what I loved was the synergy with Race of Crashpoint Tower and The Rising Storm. I like the character Rhyme. I like that he's a mechanic. I want to say it's like bottom of C, but I think I'm gonna have to agree with you. It is a D. The best part about it is that it brings Ram into the High Republic adventures. All right, our next one is Monster of Temple Peak. I think this is the one that I always had a little bit more trouble getting into. I think having just read a little bit more of Ty York in another comic, I definitely enjoyed her a little bit more there than here. It's basically her hunting the monster, realizing the monster is not to be causing this trouble, but it's actually the people. I was expecting a lot more. This is definitely one that I have not. I don't think I really thought about this one in a long while. I think it's gonna be bottom of D for me, honestly.
Yeah, this was a disappointing book, especially because it was by Kevin Scott. The Monster of Temple Peak, I think, is just a really, really simple story. At the time, we were getting a lot of expansion of the characters in High Republic Adventures, and we were getting the High Republic consistently delivering on solid storytelling every week. And this book promised to tell a solid origin story for a character that was really good in The Rising Storm with Ty York. And ultimately the origin story parts of her story didn't feel like they were in depth enough. This is a basically a Witcher in Star Wars, and I want to see Ty York do some actual like hunting stuff. Like I want to see her take down really big monsters, things that only a Jedi monster hunter can do. I would agree. I think I personally would put it ahead of Race to Crashpoint Tower, but we're splitting hairs here. It's in D tier. We clarify this every tier list. Just because something's in D doesn't mean it's gets a D from us. But next we get to Out of the Shadows. It was a book that I personally found a little long and dull. I found a lot of the character stuff a little repetitive across characters. Sylvester Yaros felt like a repeat of other types of non-Jedi characters we had already seen throughout the initiative. Reed Silas here didn't really grow as much as I had hoped, especially coming off of Into the Dark. And I think ultimately Out of the Shadows was the one that made me realize that these authors were going to stick to telling stories about the characters they created. It didn't matter what the medium was. And in a lot of ways, I think that hampers the excitement of continuing some of these stories. It's something that Phase Two, I think, did a lot better, where we do tie in elements of other things that other authors write, but ultimately there were through line narratives throughout both young adult books in Phase Two and both adult books in Phase One. There was information and big reveals at the end of Out of the Shadows 2 that never really seemed to come back and play a major role. I would put this probably at the top of D just because it was very disappointing.
I don't think time has really improved my opinion of this book. It hasn't made it worse necessarily either. Sylvester honestly kind of felt like she got even more bogged down by all the stuff that Ernestra and the grass and everything, all those storylines kind of combining together. If this was a bigger book, if Tempest Runner was way better tied into this, if we got to deal with whatever was happening with the Yarrow family a little bit more and what they do next, I think that would have been great. But the story has a good like 100 pages where they're just on Coruscant, just talking. The ending though, with the Mari Santeca and having her secret be passed on to Vernestra, that is very cool. It's got to be a D for me. Our next one is the Tempest Runner, which I did mention. I think it was very engrossing, actually, in a lot of ways. When I was reading it, I was like, yeah, that's really fun. That's really interesting. Wow, this character is broken down. It was a good first take of an audio drama. I don't know if I would consider it a B like I did before. I would say either top of C or bottom B for me.
I would say this is a C. I think especially after the Battle of Jedha has come out, we really got to see, yeah, an audio drama in the High Republic is done right. But it is the story, like you said, it's a full circle story for Lorna D. It doesn't really have much weight amongst most High Republic material. Like when you go to read the character in the High Republic comics, she's not much different than she was from when you read her in Light of the Jedi and the Rising Storm. Next, we have The Edge of Balance. This is including volumes 1 and 2. The Edge of Balance is also a story that is relatively underwhelming. This is a manga. I don't think it uses the medium of manga well enough. Don't get me wrong, there's beautiful art here, and it does work with some of the Japanese inspired elements it brings to the High Republic, but ultimately the action isn't as kinetic as a lot of other manga are. I think amongst Jedi in Phase 1, Lily is one of the least interesting. So when it comes to Volume 1 and 2 of Edge of Balance, I would say they're also probably C tier.
Yeah, I would agree C tier. It's great to see the art. I mean, manga naturally it's on paper, it's ink, right? So it's not going to be as colorful as the comics is, but there's a lot more insane like line work here, and I really loved like how the Banshee Temple was like tied into a tree and just how natural this environment was, but also very uniquely its own and Star Wars. Bottom C for me. I think that's where I'd put it. Next one is the High Republic, Trail of Shadows. And boy, I mean, there was like a good month and a half where Liam and I were like obsessed with this miniseries. It was so good. If it weren't for the ending having to be tied into the Fallen Star so dramatically, I think this could have ended up being one of the best Star Wars comics in history. I'll say bottom of A, but I would not be opposed to moving it down.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too. I think we put it in A last time, and this was a book, like you mentioned, the first 2.5 issues were fantastic. Like some of the best Star Wars comics I'd read, definitely the best stuff in the High Republic. There was a mystery to this that felt like it could just continue forever, And I think that was the problem by the time we had gotten to the Fallen Star, the mystery of the Nameless, the mystery of the Leveler, the Shriekerai. That stuff wasn't as much of a mystery anymore. So it kind of ruins a bit of the ending, the way this was spread out. I can't think of too many other comics I would say are much, much better than this. So I would say amongst Star Wars comics in the High Republic, this probably is an A tier. So let's move on to the last adult novel of Phase 1. This was The Fallen Star from Claudia Gray, a book that works really well in a lot of parts, but other things feel a bit disjointed. One of our complaints always has been about The Fallen Star that they tried to make the final point of the High Republic Phase 1 such a fulcrum for every single piece of media that a lot of things feel absent. Characters come in for chapters and then disappear for the entirety of the rest of the story. Things are mentioned that ultimately never are resolved in this story, and you have to read a comic book or you have to read a junior novel or a young adult novel to see what that connection was. So in that way, I think there's a lot of aspects of the Fallen Star that are a bit choppy, but I don't know if that has anything to do with the storytelling behind Claudia Gray's work. Like, her writing here is still fantastic. The way she gets you into the sinister mood of when these Jedi are being stalked by the Nameless. There are some serious consequences in this book, and there are significant deaths for some big characters. I think this is still an A tier book. I think it's right in there next to Into the Dark. I think it's aged a little bit better in my mind, and I'm good with either right after Into the Dark or right before.
I agree. I think it is an A. Like I said, like you said, I think it's aged a lot better. I think we were just really disappointed seeing all these characters put together. Seeing a lot of them die was shocking. Not a S tier, but it's definitely. I'd say it's behind Into the Dark. So I still think Into the Dark balances everything really well for me. Our next book is the young adult novel Midnight Horizon from Daniel Jose Older, who did a lot of stuff in the High Republic Adventures, and he basically brings the full cast here, right? We get Z, Lula Taisoa, we got Court, all these characters happening, but we also got to get Reith finally, who I thought was really well set up in Into the Dark to be a big character. He has a role to play in the Marvel High Republic line, but then he kind of just isn't there. Seeing a little bit more of Corellia at this time and seeing how the core planets just don't care about the Nile because the Nile stuff is all outer rim, away from them. Seeing that and the investigator who like works with them was really cool. I don't know, where would I put this? I would put this. Actually, I might put it at the very bottom. At B. That's where I'm gonna put it.
I'd put it at the bottom of B2. I think over time, as we moved away from this one, I don't really ever think about Midnight Horizon. It's a solid book, and I think for people like us, completionists, people who are reading everything in the High Republic, there's a lot of rewarding stuff in here from High Republic Adventures. There aren't as many things that I think make this book stand out on its own. I think Midnight Horizon's a good book. I think there's a lot here to like. There is a lot of humor here, a lot of fun that can be had with most of Daniel Jose Older's writing. It was good enough, and I think that's good enough to put it at the bottom of B. Lastly, our final novel here in Phase 1 was Mission to Disaster, the second junior novel from Justina Ireland. This one goes back to Vernestra Rowe and Emery Cantaros. This was a good book. I, again, like A Test of Courage, it does feature characters and stronger moments here than most junior novels do. I would say it's either top of C, bottom of B for me.
I like this one a little bit more, but not for like the reasons you'd expect. I guess I'll put it bottom B. It's not anything terrible. Next up, we got Eye of the Storm 1 and 2. They're S tier. They are incredible stories. We get a lot of what's going on with Evereni and their backstory as a race of people in the galaxy, why they're not trusted. We get to see a lot of what happened with Margon's father. Ability, the payoff there of some stuff that I kind of wanted in Fallen Star was really here. Here is where we get the Markion that we saw in Rising Storm, that we especially saw in Light of the Jedi, the true villain. I will put these two issues in S tier.
I agree. S tier behind Rising Storm. Eye of the Storm is easily the best comic in the High Republic so far. It introduces us to so many things that we were wondering about throughout the entirety of Phase 1, and I think these issues are only stronger now having read Phase 2. Moving on to Phase 2, we have Path of Deceit, the first novel in Phase 2, is the first young adult novel as well. This was written by Tessa Gratton and Justina Ireland, and I love this story. I think this is a great book. This story is a well-crafted thriller. It's short, it's compact, but it's tense, and it's really, really interesting. A very disturbing twist ending that you're not going to see coming. I think it's a significant step down from Light of the Jedi and the Rising Storm, but it's also a big step up to me from Into the Dark and the Fallen Star that I think it is an S tier.
Yeah, I mean, I think this really started Phase 2 off with a bang, especially with a lot of people's concerns that, like, we just left on a huge cliffhanger, and now you're telling us we're going back 150 years? What gives, right? What gives is that we're exploring the path of the open hand, an incredibly complicated look at what cults can be and the power they hold over very young people. The mother is so good in this. She's very mysterious. It's no Rising Storm, but definitely above Eye of the Storm. Next up, we have our first adult novel, which is Convergence from new author Zoraida Cordova. I'm not a huge fan of this book. I'm very glad a lot of it has been patched up, kind of with Cataclysm, with Battle of Jedha. I think it gets really muddled with what its plot is with the Irami and Arano conflict. It felt like a lot of things were stuffed in, and the only thing that you really have to care about is that love one at the end. And for now, they put the pat at the open hand at bay. I would put it maybe mid B.
I was gonna say top of C personally. It's around the Midnight Horizon level for sure. I have a lot of the same problems you have. I think I actually even liked it more, which is funny for the ranking. But I think this is a solid character book. The characters that are introduced here are really good. Princess Siriel, Barin, and Fontuzin of Irem and Arano are strong characters. Their relationship and the romance works. The politics of their two planets work really well. And I do like Axel Greylark. I think he's a strong character. Gelanadtai, the Jedi, I thought was one of the most boring Jedi we had ever gotten in a Star Wars novel. I think it is C tier worthy. It is much better than Mission to Disaster, though. So if we put Mission to Disaster in B, I'm okay putting it up in B tier with Midnight Horizon and Mission to Disaster also. Next, we have Quest for the Hidden City. This was the first junior novel in the High Republic Phase 2, written by George Mann. This is a nice little fast-paced adventure story. When we talk about Quest of the Jedi, which was the subtitle of the High Republic Phase 2, the junior novels are kind of the only thing that give us these like exciting adventures, these explorations into the frontier with these weird creatures that we don't know what they're like. That's what we get from Quest for the Hidden City, and I think that actually works quite well. I think there's solid characters in this, and some decent twists and turns. You can see them coming a little bit if you're an older reader, but for the audience this is meant for, I think they'll enjoy it. If we're putting Mission to Disaster in B again, I would put this in B. I think it's a better book than Mission to Disaster, a better paced book, and a little bit more entertaining.
Yeah, I would also put it in B. I like Rupert. I think she's coded to be like Indian, so being Indian myself, I kind of like that as well. Got me a little bit more interested. But I think the thing that I really liked was George Mann came from writing these myths and fables and dark legend stuff, so he kind of brings a little bit of that stranger aura to this, which I didn't expect from a junior novel. It was good. I liked it. I think it is worthy of being B. Well, then we can move on to the High Republic Phase 2 Marvel comic line. It's very concise. It doesn't let itself get distracted. I really did like Vildar Mac, his whole backstory as a Kefar and, the Masters of Tongue and all that. The Battle of Jedha, seeing that illustrated out, at least some fronts of it, was very cool. I don't know if it's worthy of bottom of A, but at the same time, I think Trail of Shadows is not that far away from it.
Yeah, I was gonna say top of B. Even though we have things in S and A, there are big gaps, right? Like I think Light of the Jedi and Rising Storm are a big gap above Path of Deceit and Eye of the Storm. And then in A, Into the Dark and the Fallen Star are a big gap above Test of Courage and Trail of Shadows. I agree. I think this is close to that Trail of Shadows level. I don't know if there was ever a moment reading High Republic Phase 2 that I was as engrossed as I was into the beginning of Trail of Shadows. And in that way, when we were reviewing the comics, I think I said that Phase 1, I think, is more ambitious. It goes for things, and I like its scope. But Phase 2 is a tighter story, a better told story, and overall, I think a little bit better comic.
But I think I felt a lot more immersion here than I ever did with the changing story of Phase 1 Marvel High Republic. So I'd put it slightly ahead, yeah.
And B. Adventures has been all right. It's good. Like I mentioned in the comic review, I will never ever hate on something for having Therm Scissor Punch and Dexter Jetster in it. However, this series it's just kind of average. I think even with the Jedi as interesting as Sab Maligan in the High Republic Adventures Phase 1, seeing her as a very young Padawan, you don't get to really see her in her young prime, which is kind of what I was hoping for a Sab Maligan story. Like we see her older in Phase 1. I wanted to see her in her 20 somethings, really kicking ass. And here we get to see her become who she is. I'd say this is probably a C tier for me right now.
I can see why it's so effective to her personality, because if it happened in her youth. And it's no shame to see Dex Jester and getting, yeah, we get to see obviously Mass Kanata and her crew with Dex in it. Durham has like a really great scene where he really uses just scissor hands and lives up to his name. Yeah, I'd put it at bottom of C. I want to see where it ends up. Yeah, I think we can move on to our first mini series here, and one that I think we were extremely excited for, and that was the Blade. I think for the most part, it lands everything it needs to. I think I'm a little bit critical in it. I think some of the weakness that I find here lies in that relationship with Porter and Barish, who is, yes, named after the Bearish vow that Charles Soule introduced way back in his Darth Vader series. I think the last issue kind of pushes things rapidly and closes them off, and then causes the Bears vow to happen, right? And I thought the Bears vow happening was a little convenient. And what we got here from Porter was great with the flashbacks with Barris, with them being the brother sister dynamic. But I do wonder why it was in phase two. You could have just done this as a backstory in phase three in a lot of ways.
If you've seen our comic reviews, you know that I said this is my favorite comic of phase two, and I stand by that. This was, to me, the best one I read. Light of the Jedi being my favorite novel, Porter Engle was a standout character. I like Charles Soule's writing in general. He can be a bit wordy, and it does affect almost every comic he writes. But overall, I think he makes up for what he lacks, I guess, in page time with the text. It's got some really great action, some really cool Western samurai elements, which is what I was hoping for from something called The Blade. I love the family dynamic between the two of them, even though they're not blood siblings. There is a really interesting idea of them making a pact to be kind of adoptive siblings to themselves. For me, I was going to toss this an A, so then we'll have to debate here.
I don't know if it even deserves being bottom of A for me.
Okay.
That's where I'm at.
Then
Yeah.
I would say, personally, since this is my favorite of phase two, I'm okay with it at bottom of A, because there are other things coming here that I would probably, I think you're going to probably recommend for A, and I would say are bottom of A, top of B for me. So if we put this one at bottom of A, I'll compromise for that future one. Next, we have the audio drama of the High Republic Phase 2. This is the High Republic, the Battle of Jedha by George Mann. Again, George Mann, one of the stronger writers in Phase 2, and his work on the Battle of Jedha was excellent. We mentioned earlier with Tempest Runner, he really shows us here with the Battle of Jedha what a true High Republic audio drama can be like. I think with Tempest Runner, which was an experiment for the audio drama format, here he just goes for it. And this is the fulcrum, the big almost climax of the entirety of High Republic Phase 2. Everything that happens after this is based on the Battle of Jedha. Good characters introduced here. Creighton's son is a really, really interesting Jedi master that I really liked, and Ada Forte, another good Jedi. I'm not sure if I would say I like it more than Into the Dark or The Fallen Star. It's right there for me. I'm okay with it above any of those. I'm also okay with it right after The Fallen Star, but it's definitely an A tier and better than Trail of Shadows, Blade, and A Test of Courage.
I would put it ahead of Test of Courage. I really like Battle of Jet. I think George Mann really kills it. I love Creighton's son. I like his personality kind of shining through when he's actually quite humorous, but people don't really realize that. I just so happen to think that it is very clearly a middle chapter with a little bit of fluff. And I think being in the middle of that's a great place. Our next book is Cataclysm, and that was written by Lydia King. And right, I didn't expect Cataclysm to be this good, right? It is. I will say it is S tier for me, just because of how well it kind of finishes up its story. I love where Axel's story goes. I love getting like an emotional spectrum. I think the fighting there with the leveler being put out, the different fronts of the Jedi, those who die there, obviously, there are some unfortunate deaths here, and some people you don't think die, and then they do die. Maybe behind Path to Deceit, but I can also see it being ahead of Path to Deceit.
Yeah, I would say the High Republic Cataclysm, shockingly to me and shockingly to a lot of you, if you haven't read it and you read Convergence, I'd say this is my favorite High Republic Phase 2 story. This was just epic. Like the fight here, the way the Jedi side, because Path of Vengeance gives us the Path of the Open Hand side to the Battle of Dalna and the aftermath of the Battle of Jedha. Here is the Jedi side, and this ties in so wonderfully to Convergence with the Iram and Arano conflict, but it also really connects well with the progression of characters like you mentioned, Gillenati, Axel, Greylark, and getting Keon Greylark a lot more into the Chancellors here, Chancellor Orlan Malo as well. There's just a multifaceted side to this novel that, even though it is long, it gives you so many different perspectives of Phase 2. It really was a well-rounded, nice connective tissue to everything across Phase 2 besides the path stuff. So many shocking deaths happen. People are dying right and left. Yaddle has a wonderful appearance here with the little Padawan, or a youngling named Sippa, who is also really fun. I love the chaos of this. I love the switching perspectives. All of it worked really well. I'd personally put it above Path of Deceit. They're very, very different types of novels. But for me, this one worked. It was like the Battle of Valo, but for half the book. So next, we follow that up with Quest for Planet X. This was the second junior novel. Quest for Planet X, I think, was pretty good. This was a faster paced book, or a shorter book, I should say, than Quest for the Hidden City. But I don't know if it did as much for me for the characters. Rupert here, she goes through some things that help push her in the direction she was already going, but I don't know if she learns anything new. And same with Das Lefbrook. He learns a little bit more about family from Quest for the Hidden City, but some of the decisions he makes at the beginning of this I found to be kind of strange for where he's left off from in the first book. I thought Quest for the Hidden City was a bit faster paced, more exciting read than Quest for Planet X. Maybe top of C.
Sky and Das, I think, have a pretty good development with each other. I think they're a fun group. Like you said, it is a shorter read, but I don't know if it's as enticing as Hidden City was. That's why I gotta go for bottom of B. All right, next up we have the Nameless Terror, another Dark Horse miniseries, and one that I actually like quite a bit. I thought it was nice to really see the levelers with their full art. You know, we've seen concept art, but seeing them in action and movement, that was quite cool. I liked our master from Hidden City coming back. We do spend a lot of time with Jedi Apprentice Corran, and he's got his master Shula. They're often separated, and it's nice to see like what his struggles are and kind of pairing himself with another Jedi master and what their opinion is, what they should do. Personally, I would put it. I could push it up A. I was trying to adjust for you.
No, for me, I probably would put it top of B, but this was the one that I think for me, if Blade was top of B for you and that's an A for me, this would probably be top of B for me if it's an A for you, and then we could put it in A. But anyway, this is my second favorite comic of the High Republic Phase 2. I think it's a really well written, tight thriller in miniseries form. George Mann, again, writing a really, really solid comic here. Ultimately, I thought this was really good. I would put it at the top of B, but I'm okay with bottom of A also. And then we'll move on to Quest of the Jedi. Quest of the Jedi was a story that takes place further back than the High Republic Phase 2, but it starts from the perspective of Aslan Rel during the High Republic Phase 2. It tells an interesting story about this crystal that ultimately becomes the Rod of Daybreak and the Rod of Seasons. It's a unique homage to kind of the 90s style Dark Horse comics. I like this story, but for me, I'd say this is probably a C tier comic. It's good. I wish it was great.
Yeah, for something written by Claudia Gray, I was expecting a lot. And I know this is like our first real foray into comics. It's a pretty generic story. The only thing to think about is the crystal. Honestly, I would say behind Edge of Balance for me, because I think Edge of Balance still has some wonderful art. Okay, so now we can move on to the last young adult novel of Phase 2, Path of Vengeance, written by Kevin Scott. Kevin kills it here. I was everything that I felt about Cataclysm, how incredible and complex it was. It does have a little bit more of an investigative angle too on what's going on with the mother and all that. My only issue is that the mother feels a little simplified by here. I liked where Marta went here. I thought her development would be a little faster, but a lot of it does happen more at the end. I like what they do with Yana, and I thought it was pretty surprising where Yana and Marta leave, and I think that could be pretty interesting if they develop that. This was great. I don't think it's good as Path to Deceit because I think sometimes it was a little stretched here and there. I would put it right behind Path to Deceit though.
I agree with that, and I agree with the placement as well. I think Path of Vengeance is a wonderful book, and I want to reiterate almost everything you said. The character work here is fantastic. The arc of Marta Rowe from Path of Deceit to Path of Vengeance is one of my favorites in the High Republic. The mother, I think, works really well here. I agree she's a little simplified, but I think she still is quite strong as a villain. Getting more of a Herald is awesome. Yana Rowe is excellent here. So lastly, we get the Edge of Balance Precedent, which was the manga for the High Republic Phase 2. This was a really big step up, in my opinion, from the Edge of Balance Volumes 1 and 2 from Phase 1. Precedent is a nice capper for Phase 2, kind of like Eye of the Storm. It is an epilogue to Path of Vengeance. But at the same time, it's also the furthest point in the High Republic timeline. We do get post Fallen Star here. This talks about Aslan Rel. He's one of the main characters, and Master Arkov. from phase one. A lot of really good elements here, and this does also really use its form to tell the story well. Like, I think out of the 3 volumes of the manga we've gotten, this one uses the art and the medium of manga, especially with the lack of color, using the sketch format, just pins. It looks really nice, and there's some cool dark imagery here. This is probably my third favorite of all the comics that we got in this phase. I wouldn't say for me it's as good as The Blade and The Nameless Terror, but I would put it probably right above High Republic Phase 2 in the top of B.
It's a interesting story, but I think some of the issue comes with it being both a prequel, but also kind of continuing with Master Arkoff in Phase 1 before kind of bringing back into the Phase 2 storyline. I think Aslan, as we see him at the Path of Vengeance, he's just crazed and mad and all that. And seeing the visuals of his visions, like it's all blood coming out of his eyes and face, that was kind of crazy. I would be okay with like a top of B, somewhere around there. I think it's still quite beautiful.
Okay, so that's our tier list for the High Republic. This is our updated Phase 1 and Phase 2 tier list. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you hit that like button and you're subscribed to the channel for more Phase 2 content. We do have a reading guide coming, as well as a review of the junior novels. Also, comment below, let us know your rankings of the entire Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the High Republic. We'll be back for Phase 3 as well, so just keep an eye out on our channel for this fall. But thanks so much for watching our continued coverage of the High Republic. We're going to have so much more content for all of you guys that is not High Republic themed in July as well. We'll get back to some of our content as usual once we finally catch up here. But that's going to wrap it up for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.